Ad hominem, it is the assumption and assertion that an argument is flawed or false because of the arguer's identity. Hasty generalization. Hasty generalization, also known as the overgeneralization fallacy, occurs when making a claim based on evidence that is too small. Red herring fallacy. A red herring is something that misleads or distracts from a relevant or important question. It might be used to change the subject. Tu quoque fallacy. Tu quoque is a technique that tends to discredit the opponent's argument by attacking the opponent's behavior and actions as being inconsistent with their argument, therefore accusing hypocrisy instead of countering the actual argument. Slippery slope fallacy. In a slippery slope argument, a course of action is rejected because, with little or no evidence, one insists that it will lead to a chain reaction resulting in an undesirable end or ends. Special pleading fallacy. Special pleading happens when applying standards, principles, or rules to other people or circumstances while making oneself or certain circumstances exempt from the same critical criteria without providing adequate justification. Texas Sharpshooter fallacy. The Texas Sharpshooter fallacy takes its name from the metaphor of a gunman shooting and then drawing targets around the bullet hole clusters to make it look like he hit the target. It illustrates how people first figure out what their conclusion is and then go looking for data that supports it, ignoring differences and randomness. Suppressed correlative. The attempt to redefine one of two mutually exclusive options so that one alternative encompasses the other, thus making one alternative impossible. Circular reasoning fallacy. The circular reasoning fallacy is an argument that assumes the very thing it is trying to prove is true instead of offering evidence. Appeal to nature fallacy. It's an argument in which it is proposed that a thing is good because it is natural or bad because it is unnatural. Loaded question. A loaded question is a question that already contains an assumption. False dilemma fallacy. The false dilemma fallacy, also called the black and white fallacy, occurs when someone misrepresents an issue by offering only two options when more exist, or by presenting the options as mutually exclusive when they are not. Strawman fallacy. A strawman fallacy happens when one rebuts an argument by misconstruing it. No true Scotsman fallacy. It's an attempt to defend a generalization of a certain group by excluding any counterexamples for not being pure enough. Composition fallacy. It arises when one infers that something is true of the whole from the fact that it is true of some part of the whole. Division fallacy. The division fallacy occurs when one reason that something true for a whole must also be true for all or some of its parts. Affirming the consequent. Affirming the consequent is the fallacy of taking a true conditional statement and invalidly inferring its converse. Burden of proof fallacy. The burden of proof lies with the one who makes a claim, not the one who denies it. The burden of proof fallacy happens when a person tries to remove their need to provide proof for many reasons. Anecdotal fallacy. The anecdotal fallacy occurs when people use their limited personal experience to draw sweeping conclusions about a given topic. Middle ground fallacy. It's the fallacy that the truth is always in the middle of two opposites. Affirming a disjunct. The affirming a disjunct fallacy occurs when given an either-or scenario, you wrongly assume that if one statement or outcome is true, the other one cannot be true. Appeal to tradition. It happens when we ignore the evidence that we should change because we have been doing something for a long time. Sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy is our tendency to continue with something we've invested money, effort, or time into, even if the current costs outweigh the benefits. Historian's fallacy. The historian's fallacy occurs when one assumes that decision makers in the past viewed events from the same perspective and had the same information as those subsequently analyzing the decision. Inflation of conflict. It's the error of exaggerating the amount of disagreement in a field in order to invalidate claims in that field. Incomplete comparison. It's a misleading argument popular in advertising. Since the assertion is incomplete, it cannot be refuted. Ludic fallacy. It's a term used to describe how people mistake the kind of uncertainty found in games for the kind of uncertainty found in real life. Appeal to ignorance. It happens when someone asserts that a proposition is true because it has not yet been proven false, or that a proposition is false because it has not yet been proven true. Continuum fallacy. It's the argument that two states or conditions cannot be considered distinct or do not exist at all because between them there exists a continuum of states. Appeal to accomplishment. It's kind of an appeal to authority fallacy. It happens when an assertion is deemed true or false based on the accomplishments of the proposer. Courtier's reply. When a criticism is dismissed by claiming that the critic lacks sufficient knowledge, credentials, or training to credibly comment on the subject matter. Appeal to consequences. It's an argument that concludes a hypothesis to be either true or false, based on whether the premise leads to desirable or undesirable consequences. Ignoratio elenchi. Ignoratio elenchi, also called missing the point, is the fallacy of presenting an argument that may or may not be logically valid and sound, but whose conclusion fails to address the issue in question. Equivocation. The equivocation fallacy refers to the use of an ambiguous word or phrase in more than one sense within the same argument. Faulty analogy. A faulty analogy is saying that two things are alike in other ways just because they are alike in one way. Personal incredulity fallacy. It's committed when the arguer presumes that whatever is true must be easy to understand or to imagine. Ambiguity fallacy. It happens when an unclear phrase with multiple definitions is used within the argument, therefore it does not support the conclusion. Genetic fallacy. The genetic fallacy is the act of rejecting or accepting an argument solely on the basis of its origin rather than its content. Geological fallacy. Geological fallacy is the faulty argument that the true meaning of a word is its oldest or original meaning. Nirvana fallacy. Comparing a realistic solution with an idealized one and discounting or even dismissing the realistic solution as a result of comparing it to a perfect world or impossible standard. Retrospective determinism. It's the thought that because something happened under some circumstances, it was therefore bound to happen due to those circumstances. Thought-terminating cliché. It's a form of loaded language, often passing as folk wisdom, with the function of stopping an argument from proceeding further, ending the debate with a cliché rather than a point. Fallacy of the single cause. It occurs when it is assumed that there is a single, simple cause of an outcome when in reality, it may have been caused by a number of small causes. Quoting out of context. It's a fallacy in which a passage from a quote is removed from its surrounding matter in such a way as to distort its intended meaning. Context may be omitted intentionally or accidentally. Denying the antecedent. Denying the antecedent infers the inverse from an original statement. It's something like, if you are a ski instructor, then you have a job. You are not a ski instructor, therefore you have no job. False cause. A false cause fallacy occurs when someone incorrectly assumes that something causes something else without enough proof, usually using just a correlation as proof. Proof by assertion. It's a fallacy in which a proposition is repeatedly restated, regardless of contradiction and refutation. The proposition can sometimes be repeated until any challenges or opposition cease, letting the proponent assert it as fact solely due to a lack of challengers. Cherry picking. It's the act of pointing to individual cases or data that seem to confirm a particular position, while ignoring a significant portion of related and similar cases or data that may contradict that position. Psychologist fallacy. It's a fallacy that occurs when an observer assumes that his or her subjective experience reflects the true nature of an event. Revocation fallacy. It happens when an abstract concept is treated as if it were a concrete, real event. Something like saying that evolution selects which traits are passed on to future generations, while evolution is not a conscious entity with will. I'm entitled to my opinion fallacy. When a person discredits any opposition by claiming that they are entitled to their opinion instead of logically analyzing said opposition. Two wrongs make a right. It's an argument in which an allegation of wrongdoing is countered with a similar allegation. Vacuous truth. A claim that is technically true but meaningless, such as, I always wake up at 6 a.m. except when I don't. Fallacy fallacy. It's saying that when an argument contains a fallacy, its conclusion must be false. Definist fallacy. It happens when one defines a term in such a way that makes one's position much easier to defend. Ecological fallacy. Ecological fallacies assume what is true for a population is true for the individual members of that population. False equivalence. It's a fallacy in which an equivalence is drawn between two subjects based on flawed or false reasoning. Moralistic fallacy. Making statements about what is on the basis of claims about what ought to be in violation of fact-value distinction. Appeal to the stone. It happens when a dismissal is made by stating or reiterating that the argument is absurd without providing further argumentation. Circumstantial ad hominem. Stating that the arguer's personal interest in advancing a conclusion means that their conclusion is wrong. Tone policing. An ad hominem fallacy that focuses on the emotion behind a message rather than the message itself as a discrediting tactic. Association fallacy. It's the fallacy that asserts that properties of one thing must also be properties of another thing if both things belong to the same group. Appeal to novelty. It happens when a proposal is claimed to be superior or better solely because it is new or modern. Chronological snobbery. Chronological snobbery considers modern ideas superior to those from earlier ages just because they are modern. It's a form of appeal to novelty.